with the third step prayer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rob Kay, recovered alcoholic. Great to see everybody this morning. The step 3 prayer, which is on page 63, if you want to follow along. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage to self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. We are starting on page 49 today, and we are about halfway down the page, and it would be instead of regarding ourselves. Let's look here. Let's go back to page 48, Rob, and start at everybody nowadays.
You got it. Page 48, everybody. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the precise steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere.
Absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and just keep going, Rob. I just wanted to kind of get ourselves kind of set up here, but I think that this last sentence really kind of sums up what we just read. And that is were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. I suppose what I would say going into this is that there is absolutely no way that I could comprehend that this just happened out of nothing. Something happened. It's the only way I can get my brain to kind of comprehend this. And there's something happened, and it took something more, in my opinion, than science to get us, to where we are with regard to everything being created into what it is today. And again, I can see it on paper, I can see it on TV, but to comprehend billions of years ago just isn't, it just doesn't really. It's bigger than what I can get. I mean, what I can digest in such a way that I've got the start and the finish, that kind of thing. So with that, we'll just keep right on going there, Rob.
Okay. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists choose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it?
So a couple of comments here. One, I see exactly where Bill is coming from in this regard. I want to say that, yeah, I lean towards science. I absolutely do. My wife is a scientist, and I like that tangibleness of being able to watch an experiment and see the start, the daring and the finish of it. So I'm very much in terms of that, but I also know with regard to evolution and how things kind of came about and were. So I don't exactly comprehend. I mean, I don't subscribe exactly to this, that this was the last word, being that our human intelligence was the last word. What I also wanted to say, which is the second part, is that it's interesting to watch how Bill kind of unfolds all of this, and he does it very subtly here, and that is rather vain of us, wasn't it? So he makes this big statement where we all kind of start to, nod our heads and kind of think to ourselves, I don't really think that I was right in my belief. If you were agnostic or atheist, that, this was the end all, but here's the deal, rather vain of us, wasn't it? So there is that kind of hook there. He's trying to get you. And if you didn't catch it, that he kind of, all of a sudden you go, yep. And then you go, wait a minute, he's got me. So I just bring that up. It's a form of, well, I think the negative side of it would be the manipulation, but what he's trying to do is basically get you to admit that you might not necessarily be quite as agnostic as you were to think you are, or atheist as you were. And again, remember that I feel like it is the true believer is also associated with this chapter very, very strongly. So, if you were to say that everything was due to God or a higher power, meaning that all of it was due to that, then you might also be in that same category as well. Rob?
Leo, I always like to bring up the fact that we cannot see wind, but we can see the effects that wind have. We see the trees blowing in the breeze. We see leaves being pushed across the grass. We can't see God, but we can see his fingerprints, and we can see the effects that he's had on our lives. He's kept us out of scrapes that, some people call gut instinct. I like to think it's God. So I just like to throw that out there.
Well, it's a nice way of putting it.
It is, and I'm not sure where I got that analogy from, but it makes sense to me. It's that, yeah, you know what? I can't see wind, but boy, I see the effect. I know that when we had talked about this earlier in the meeting before we started it, is that when we start our day off with prayer, our day goes a lot smoother. And when we don't do it, our day is a little bit off. So what do I've seen this over the course of a long time. So I try to start my day off with prayer. Why? Because I know my day is going to go a little bit smoother. And the more we see it working in our lives, the more we're willing to do it. But until we see tangible results, it's hard to say, yeah, I got to keep praying because things will get better. When I see it working in my life, I realize how important it is in my life. We who have traveled.
Let me. I hate to interrupt, but you've really touched on something, and I think it's an important teachable moment right now. And we're talking about sobriety. We're talking about recovery from alcoholism, and you touch on something here, and that is the power of prayer. And by praying in the morning, as you have just talked about, you're getting in touch with something that is bigger than you. That is not. It's not like you can reach out and pick it up like you can a pencil or a pen. It's something though that you touch and you can feel. And again, like you said, with wind, you can't really see it, but it's there. And it's that kind of feeling that will build that confidence that you're looking for, that you need in order to be able to become a sober, recovered alcoholic. And so I think that's an important, you bring up a great point, but to tie it back to where we are and to try and show when we're talking to somebody or when we're struggling ourselves with regard to things, the power of prayer, and to be able to focus on that, to get in touch with something that's bigger than ourselves, is exactly what we're trying to get to here. And the power of that is immense. And that is what you're trying to touch. So I just to really tie that up there. That was excellent, Rob. Thanks.
Thanks, Leo. We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and directions to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves.
Right. And this is just basically demonstrating us as being closed-minded and contempt before discovery. And I just want to say that that's really what he's trying to say here, is that we approached this spiritual slash God, higher power consciousness, if you will, with some level of contempt and being closed-minded. And that's really what he's basically saying in this paragraph here. And we were also very much opinionated about those that weren't. But at the same time, and this is on a personal level, I would admit to you that I thought to myself sometimes a bit, I was a bit jealous. It's like, how do they get that? Where do they get that? Why can I not see what they see? And because of that, I was not willing to believe. So once I laid down, as I say a lot, my sword and my shield, and allowed myself to be vulnerable, to be open-minded, and to listen and to seek, is when things started happening. So I just basically want to say that he's setting us up here with regard to that being closed-minded, and we're going to move on from there. Rob?
We're on page 50, everybody, right at the top. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We talk of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing.
Right, and that's just just as I just said, we're closed-minded. We're not willing to bend, and as I've just said, we just weren't willing to put our shield and our sword down and make ourselves vulnerable to listen, to be open-minded, and seek out what others have found. And we'll keep going there, Rob.
Okay. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself.
And to say that at the very end, these are questions for each individual to settle for himself. I kind of want to take this to that point. I don't know exactly how to describe to you my higher power. I know I have a higher power. I see and I feel it, and it does do benefit for me. But where I'm at is that it's not a requirement. And thank goodness for Rob. Thank goodness for Rob. Thank goodness for Bill and his ability to write this paragraph for us, because he is essentially describing what each of us probably wishes we could describe, but we haven't. So I haven't got that kind of ability, and I'm glad that he's doing it. But I just want to say that this is where, you don't have to explain it to someone else. If you're having somebody challenge you about, tell me about your higher power, so that I can try to find it or whatever, grab the book, grab this chapter, and just walk through the We Agnostics with your newcomer and or those that are doubting you with regard to finding that higher power, because the answers are in here, as opposed to putting you on the spot and having you answer it as a potential sponsor, or at least somebody that has recovered and is attempting to bring somebody along. So that at the end here, just don't feel like that you have to, if you get challenged, don't feel like that you're alone by any stretch. You've got this book, you've got others to help, but nonetheless, I just want to make that point here, because that's kind of where we are here. And that is that, some of us feel compelled to have to explain our higher power. And when we struggle with it, automatically somebody that's challenging you or that is skeptic is just going to get even more skeptical, because they're going to say, well, see, you can't even answer it. So how do I answer it? So that's important point here is that this chapter is here for you as a sponsor, or just somebody that's bringing somebody along in the book and helping somebody. This is where you would come to describe the higher power and how to get there if you're skeptical.
And as Bill brought out last week, and I'm talking Bill from New Jersey, is that Bill W. had no theological training. But here he comes up with this chapter that is so God inspired. It boggles my mind that, somebody that had no theological training was able to come up with this incredible chapter. So, on one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible, as a celebrated American statement put it. Let's look at the record.
Yep. So I underlined and highlighted every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. The power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. Basically, what Bill is saying here is what we call the bluff, the bottom line up front. So he is setting the stage, getting you kind of involved and essentially interested. And now what he's basically doing is saying every person that has gone through this process has been able to tap into this power. And so now that this is where we're going. Now we can get there. So that's kind of the way that this particular paragraph or passage here, a couple of sentences is doing, is just getting you set up so that now you can search it out yourself.
Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power and to do certain simple things, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new peace, power, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seemingly futility of existence, they showed the underlying reason why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people were able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their life, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith.
Yeah. So it's really the things that I highlighted is the revolutionary change. And then towards the bottom of page 50, where it says this happened soon after they wholeheartedly. So this is back to the passage of those who really tried. I think it was in the second introduction to the second edition, whereas those who really tried, 50% got sober at once, 25%, et cetera, got sober at a later date and everything. This is another one of those statements is that this happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements, and that is really doing the rest of the work. So it's just another way of saying it. And once confused and baffled by the seemingly futility of existence, okay, and that again, we're talking about not only the drink, but because of all the consequences surrounding us because of our alcoholism, we feel like that it's futile to even exist because we don't even know where to start at that point. But we get down to the bottom of here, and the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives. They present a powerful reason why one should have faith. Well, guess what? We're going to find out what those powerful reasons are going forward. But the point here is that as we experience the human experience, okay, we are, and he does say this, leaving aside the drink question. So we're just going to set that over here for right now. Let's focus on all of the calamity, all of the baffling parts of life and that sort of thing. And let's try and find something that can help strengthen our beliefs in ourselves and the things around us. And so essentially that, once you find that, then now we can put the drink question back in there. And all of a sudden now that drink problem doesn't seem quite as difficult. Rob?
How confused and baffled were we at the seeming futility of existence? Boy, I certainly had my moments where life was not much fun. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies.
Yeah, we're just kind of setting the stage here, and basically there's an old way of asking a question, and it's called a premise question. And you basically give a reason why you're about to ask a question. You give a second reason why you're going to ask the question, basically setting the stage, and then you ask the question. Well, this is what Bill is doing right here, is he's giving you kind of a premise here before the question, or before the answer, if you will. And that's kind of what's going on. So and what I want you to draw from this as a recovering alcoholic is that if you approach your higher power from this standpoint, you're going to find that you're going to be much more accepting and willing. And if you use this technique with a newcomer, you're going to find that they're going to be a lot more receptive. So, Rob?
I have a little note that I have beside that paragraph, and it says, have an open mind to new ideas. Because remember, a lot of people thought that the earth was flat at one time. Other people thought that, there was nothing up in the sky. So we have to set aside our prejudice. And that's what Bill's telling us here. Set aside your prejudice, open up your mind, be open to new ideas. We asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing.
Okay, and the thought here is basically we were closed-minded. Even today, I think the comparison might be, and it's loosely comparable, and that is in sports, breaking a particular record. Maybe it's the 100-yard dash, or maybe it's breaking a mile, how fast you can run a mile, and that sort of thing. How many turns an ice skater can accomplish in one jump? Okay, so we 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever it might have been, people were winning gold medals for running something that were seconds, if not 10 seconds slower than what we're used to today. And certainly we're thinking to ourselves, well, if that record's broken now, or they set this record, there'll be no way that you can break that record again. And then yet again, 4 or 8 years from now, somebody else comes up and breaks it. So the idea is that we think that we've reached the limits, and yet because of who we are, what we are, and because of the fact that we have this, and I'm going to say this higher power that pushes us forward, I think that you're going to find that you're able to accomplish that much more and then some, and then again reset the belief meter, if you will, and that's basically what we're saying here. Is Bill is just basically saying we were closed-minded to think that we could ever fly, yet 30 years after that we were flying, and now look at us. We've got people that are going into space for a minute or two with these new vehicles that return back to Earth and are able to be used again. It will not be far out of the realm of the reality when we start actually traveling to space on a regular basis. It's going to happen. It's already there. But I can tell you, 30 years ago, we probably had we thought about it, but it was so far out of reach that we didn't even know where to start. So it's point being is that we can accomplish the impossible, and that's kind of where we are now. We can accomplish the impossible. So with your attitude towards the flying, for example, if you take that same attitude towards God, you're probably going to be in a similar place. But if you can say to yourself, hey, we accomplished something we didn't think was possible, then perhaps I can accomplish something that wasn't possible, and I can find a higher power.
In other words, don't limit ourselves with our brains. We can do the impossible. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he will say, I bet they do it. Maybe not so long either. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new? By the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does?
Yeah. We'll keep right on going, Rob.
Okay. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. Were we having trouble with personal relationships? We couldn't control our emotional nature. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of any real help to other people. It was not a basic solution to these bedevilments, or more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight. Of course it was.
Okay, so this is an important paragraph that I want to highlight a couple of things in here. And this is some of the stuff that, what I'm going to call this paragraph is the opposite of the promises. And it is, I guess, known some of it as the bedevilments, but I'll go ahead and highlight them for you. As I see it, there's 8 of them in here. First of all, we were having trouble with personal relationships. That's 1. We couldn't control our emotional natures. That's 2. We were a prey to misery and depression. That's 3. We couldn't make a living. That's 4. We had a feeling of uselessness. That's 6. And we were full of fear, which is 7. And we were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help, is 8 to other people. So it's important here to kind of just note this. It is the opposite of the promises. So if you were to look at all of those, you could probably go, yep, I was in fact having trouble with my personal relationships. I cannot control my emotions. And we were prey to misery and depression. I mean, and on and on. So what he's basically doing here is another technique, and he's widening the gap. Okay. And this is important to get somebody from point A to point B. Where I'm at is that if you're at point A and you want to get somebody to point B, what you basically can do and this is a sales technique, is you widen that gap. You make that gap look kind of far away, and you get the person going, oh my gosh, I really need to get there, but I don't see how to do that. And then what you do as a salesperson is you create that bridge over which you're going to show this person or this company how to get from A to B. All right. And by creating that bridge, you then narrow that gap so that it's no longer there. All right. So that is a technique that he is using right now in what we call widening the gap. Okay. And it's important in this technique of how to get somebody from point A to point B. You want to make sure that they know where they are, you know where you want to go. And it is this belief in a higher power, finding that higher power and experiencing that higher power. But if you widen that gap a little bit, you create the need, you create a stronger want, okay, to get there. It's really out there. But what you do is by widening it, you create this stronger need. But then what you do is you bridge that gap. And that's what's going to happen in the next few paragraphs here. Is Bill's going to bridge that gap for you and show you exactly how to narrow that gap until it's no longer there. And all of a sudden now you're not at point A, you're at point B. Again, it's just a technique, and I just want to bring that up. But it is important to kind of note these things, because I think every one of us can take seven of the eight, six of the eight of these different bedevilments, and find ourselves saying yes to that and going, my gosh, I really do feel that. How do I get rid of that? How do I get to point B? Rob?
When we saw others solve their problem by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did.
Yep. We'll just keep right on going, Rob.
The Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who had insisted the Wrights would never fly. Logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. That is one of man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence, we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it is more sane and logical to believe than to not believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, we don't know.
Right. He's weaving, he's building the bridge. All right. I don't know if you guys can see it quite as clearly, but that's what's happening now. What he's basically doing is he's very gently, and I mean that sincerely, he's very gently giving you he's using the Wright brothers. You know, there was a belief that we weren't going to be able to fly, and sure enough, we were able to fly. So if we can believe strongly that there's no way man can fly, and then all of a sudden here we are and we can fly, then it's hard not to admit that if I say there's no way I can believe, you know, that the possibility is that I might find myself believing. And it's hard to kind of not say yes to one and then say no to the other. So what he's basically doing is kind of setting that stage. He's setting the foundation for that bridge, and he's beginning to bridge that gap. One highlight I want to say here is logic is great stuff. It certainly is. We would have chaos and calamity if we didn't have logic. So it is in fact important. So what he's acknowledging that certain things are important, and that is that logic is one of those things. We liked it, we still like it. Well, because it works, all right? It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. All right. So don't discount the fact that science, logic, and other things out there that are explainable and graspable, if you want to use a word, I don't even know if that is a word, but we'll use it, graspable. For you to be able to touch that, then yeah, that's good. But what he's also doing is say, let's use that logic in this case, okay? And what you're going to find is that it applies. Rob?
I have a little note that I've written down. Fear is a faith that bad things will happen. Faith in God is a belief that good things will happen.
Nice, nice.
When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be?
Okay, so point here, a lot of people will use these two sentences or so here, and that's it. They basically put it in front of you, and they say it's black and white. You either believe or you don't. It is or it isn't, that type of thing. This is really just a setup. And what I mean by that is that he is just prepping you for what we are about to read, okay? And so this needs expansion in order to be understood, meaning that we need to read on to be able to understand this, all right? So what we're not saying is that we're going to hit you over the head with this and immediately you have to believe or you don't believe. You can get there through through baby steps, all right? It can happen over a period of time, okay? And that is that what we call the educational type, as they use in this in the book, and that is I got my belief over time. All right, Rob.
I have another note here. What was our choice to be? And I have a note here that says, has anything else worked?
Nicely put, Rob.
Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason towards the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason has brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support.
Sure, and so he's using another analogy of the bridge, and this is essentially what I was trying to say a while ago, but he's just now kind of putting it at your feet at this point. You reason, logic, and other things have gotten you started across this bridge, and now you're at that point of stepping off and having faith, which you didn't have before, but it's still a bit scary. It's still a bit foreign, and you're not quite sure how to get that last little bit. Well, he's going to help us get there as we read forward, but just kind of have that and imagine kind of if you are working with a newcomer that's being objectionable to a higher power, how you might walk them through this process by reading this chapter and stopping from point to point and paragraph to paragraph, and how you might explain it to them, much like what Rob and I are doing, but in your own style and in your own way. Rob?
That was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? Or did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we had been faithful, abjectly faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time.
Right. And one of the ways that I got to where I decided I had faith, and that was, and I'll use an example, the very first time I flew a helicopter, I was taken out to a working area, as they called them, and there was this great big square pad of asphalt out there, and in the middle of it was painted a square. And the idea is that we went out there, the instructor, landed the helicopter, and then he handed me the controls and said, okay, Leo, pick it up. And all I want you to do is keep the helicopter inside this square. Well, I had faith that I could fly an airplane at that point, having done it already. And I had faith that I would at least be able to pick the helicopter up. But whether or not I could keep it in the square was still remained to be seen. However, I did at least have faith in my own abilities at that point, that I could at least fly the helicopter. It was a bit sloppy, but I knew I could fly it. All right, because I had already prepped in simulators and walking it, in my mind, et cetera, et cetera. So sure enough, I pick up the helicopter, and it just happened that I was able, it was sloppy, but I kept it inside the square, which was the point. But I at least had faith to take that next step. And that's kind of what he's trying to say here, is just have enough faith to take that next step. And oh, by the way, if you've got faith in yourself, in your ability to do something, irrespective of what it might be, maybe it's driving a car, maybe it's baking a cake, it could be anything, okay? But if you have faith in your abilities to do that, and you go at that with that level of confidence, you're going to find that you can transfer that faith into a higher power. And that's really kind of what he's doing here, is he's just getting you kind of prepped. Rob?
We found too that we had been worshipers. What a state of mental gooseflesh they used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, thing, money, and ourselves? And then with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we had been living by faith and little else.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, falling in love is probably an unreasonable kind of feeling, and it's a bit crazy. It's kind of calamitous and everything, but it does drive us into a particular direction. And I have a note here is that I put in here, where do you spend most of your time, energy, and thinking? And it's important to kind of note that. And had we not variously worshiped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves, certainly so we have. And nobody can say no that they haven't, at least in part. And then what other beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower, it's that awe that you have, that awe moment, as I kind of put it, as to what that is. And you kind of wonder how it got there, how things became what they are. And it's hard to just put the science stamp on it and say, oh, it's all science. It's not. And then finish up, and I highlighted this area or this part of it. Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? Surely. It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we had been living by faith and little else. And certainly, back to my flying analogy, I had faith in my abilities, and I thought that I was capable of doing those things. Otherwise, I never would have set foot inside those aircraft. And sure enough, I was able to do it. And over time, it got better and better, but I just built on that faith, which then became my reality. And then I had that confidence that I needed in order to climb into an aircraft day in and day out and be able to accomplish whatever mission I was given. We'll take that same concept, that same approach to a higher power, and I will promise you that you're going to find that it may be a little shaky at first, but if you've got that faith, over time, it just gets better and better and stronger. All right, Rob.
Imagine life without faith. Were nothing left but pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believed in life, of course we did. We could not prove life in the sense that you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons, created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seem more intelligent than that, at least so the chemist said.
Right.
Hence,
and so bottom line is that imagine life without faith. You just can't do it. And what we've done now, and what Bill has done, has walked you along, holding your hand very gently, kind of getting you to a point where you're actually having to say that, in fact, you have faith. And because of that faith, it is possible for you to find a higher power. And it's, I dare say you could admit otherwise if you are walking the walk. And remember, we're talking about coming at this with being open-minded, honest, and sincere about trying. Okay, it takes a strong willingness to at least be open to the idea. But if you are open to the idea, it's going to be hard for you to not be at that point, at this point, saying that, yes, it is very much possible for you to find that higher power. Rob?
hence, we saw that reason is in everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, though it emanate from our best minds. What about people who prove that man could never fly? Yet we had been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above the problem. They said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but like to tell ourselves it wasn't true.
Okay. Because we didn't know what they were talking about, the kind of, idea here. And I think, and it kind of goes into this next statement, actually, we were fooling ourselves. So I am getting a little bit ahead of myself. But they said God made these things possible and we only smiled. Think about that kind of that position that you had in the past when you just smiled at somebody and was like, okay, yeah, right, whatever. How closed-minded you were to what they were saying. And I'm not talking about necessarily extremists, but I am going to say that that higher power, remember we talked about prayer in the morning. It gives you focus. It gives you this feeling that you can't necessarily touch or see, but there is a newfound confidence when you do certain things and allow yourself to experience certain things, and all of a sudden your abilities increase, and what you're capable of expands. Rob?
Here's one of the greatest lines in the book coming up right now, page 55, everybody. Actually, we are fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself.
Absolutely. So think about this. What he's basically doing, and I have to kind of chuckle a little bit, because it's like at this point, it's like, of course, because now I can say, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. All right. If you are listening, and if you are agreeing, and you are open to the ideas that are being presented up until this point, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for you to say no to that very sentence. And Rob is absolutely right. It's one of the most important sentences in this book, but you have to get there. So like, if we were to read that from the very beginning, you'd be going, no, I don't agree with that. But if you've gone through this process, or if you've taken somebody through this process, it's going to be very hard for them to not say, yep, you're right. There has been a fundamental idea of God or this higher power, and make it comfortable for them. But this higher power within each of us. And certainly we look at calamity, pomp, worship, other things, but in some form or other, it was there. Faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. When you find yourself accomplishing something out of nothing and wondering how you did that, it would be faith. And faith is in the form of a higher power. Rob?
We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us.
Yep, absolutely. So we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, okay? Again, you're at this point of asking a question here. Can you at least say that there is some kind of higher power that is a part of your makeup? If you've gone through this chapter up until this point and really dug into it, it's going to be hard for you to say anything but yes. Just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Okay, sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality, deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. All right, we're there. Okay, you've got to at least say that you're willing to believe at this point, and that is the important thing to come out of this. Rob?
We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you.
Yep. Let's just keep going here, Rob. It's basically the conclusion of finding that higher power. And at this point, the minimum you should be at is the willingness to believe at this point. And if you are actually open-minded and really thinking of this through and very forthright about those feelings, you're at the point of saying that, yep, there is a higher power out there for me. Rob?
So Bill is telling us we need this power in our life. We need to sweep away prejudice, search honestly and diligently. In this book, you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school, where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, ever more so serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction.
Okay, just real quick, couple of things here. My gosh, this guy is facing a lot of the negative things in life, and yet we all have those in our lives, our families and our friends. I would just tell you the second thing is the person we're talking about is Fitzmayo, and his story is on page 208. We'll keep going, Rob.
Okay. One night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend Scourge rose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I've known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he had lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He had stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. Thus was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vicissitude had shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away. That very night, years ago, it disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink had never returned, and at such times, a great revulsion had risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink, even if he would. God had restored his sanity.
Absolutely. So we've just heard a story of a guy that was, his family was religious, and yet with all of the things happening in his life, he had figured that he had become bitter, and because of that bitterness, he had decided that there was no God. But then he finally kind of opened up. He thought to himself, is it possible that all the people that I have known that are religious, that they were wrong? And while he was pondering that, he had this thunderbolt of a thought. And for him, it was this epiphany that we talk about, much like what Bill had as well. But he was able to actually take and tap into that feeling and finally acknowledge that he had to put down his sword and his shield, as we've said before. And once he did that, it overwhelmed him with this feeling of this God consciousness, this higher power. And he was now once again in tap with that. And that power of it in and of itself gave him the strength that he needed to put down the drink and not drink anymore. It's a great story, Rob.
What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his Maker. Then he knew. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into more slowly. But he has come to all who have honestly sought him. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us.
Absolutely. We're probably going to go a couple of minutes over. I've got a couple of notes I want to make here, and I also want Bill to help us out. So I hope everybody can stay for just a few extra minutes. So one of the things I want to talk about here, and that is that when we talk about, even so has God restored us all to our own right minds, to our right minds, we're talking about step 2 here. And then to this man, the revelation was sudden. It was a spiritual experience. That's what we're talking about, is in this person's spiritual experience. His was sudden. And then they give us a way out. Some of us grow into it more slowly. That's okay. That is more of the educational kind, and the spiritual awakening that people had came over time. That was my experience, and that's okay. And he has come to us, he has come to all who have honestly sought him. Honestly sought. And that is if you are looking for that person or for that thing. And then we need to find something. This is my note at the end of this sentence, but we need to find something more powerful than ourselves. That is the essence of what we're trying to do. And I'll finish up here is a statement that I have written in here, and it's, you need to believe before you have faith. And then I said belief comes first and faith comes after. All right. And the last thing is, and this is kind of just one of those things, foxhole prayers. God, if you get me out of this, I won't drink again. God didn't, so we gave up. That's kind of that idea. If you get me out of this, I will never drink again. And I'm sure half of us, if not all of us, have been there before. But think about it. It's when we're in the foxhole and all of a sudden now everything is coming down around us that we find God. Well, why don't you do it when you've got less coming down around you, and see if you can't find God and a higher power. All right, I'm going to ask Bill if he wouldn't mind sharing, and please take a few minutes here. I know we're going to be just a little bit over.
Hi, I'm Bill, alcoholic from New Jersey. Thanks a lot, Leo. Thanks a lot, Rob. You did an awesome job as usual. Basically, what Bill's trying to do here, he's trying to give us logical reasons why we should believe in something. You know, like he talked about the steel girder. You can't see the electrons in the steel girder. He's trying to get the point across. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not there. I can't see the air in front of me, but I know it's there. If it wasn't there, I would suffocate. And he's telling us we've got to get rid of our old ideas. We need new ideas. That's basically what he's saying. And he talked about the Wright brothers. The belief at the time was man couldn't fly, but evidently these two bicycle mechanics out in Kitty Hawk never got the memo, so they got their own new ideas and they went ahead and did it anyway. You know, and he's just trying to give us some logical reasons why it makes more sense to believe in something than not believe in something. And all you need to do step 2 is just have the willingness to believe that there's a power greater than yourself. That's really all that's required for doing step 2. Step 2 is not really that hard. And the reason we need a higher power or something more powerful than ourselves is because we don't have enough power to defeat alcoholism. So we need more power. And the way we get that is from a higher power, something that's more powerful than us. And he talks in here about this guy, Fitzmayo, and what he went through. And basically it describes his spiritual experience that he had. And the alcoholic that approached him in the town's hospital was Bill Wilson. And Bill Wilson talked to him and explained to him what Bill went through. And this guy had a spiritual experience after Bill came and talked to him and explained what Bill did to have his spiritual experience. But basically what he's trying to do here, he's not trying to convince us that there is a God or what God is. He's just trying to convince us that we have a need for a God. It's not really important what's on the other side. What's important is to get us out of the way so that we can get to what's on the other side. That's basically what Bill's trying to do here. All right, thanks a lot for letting me share.
Perfect, Bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
All right.